Welcome to Story Timer at Large. Serial Killer Jeffrey Lynn Hand. It was that driving from Terre Haute down toward Evansville that stuck in my mind. In the summer of 1973, Jeffrey Lynn Hand picked up a couple on Highway 41 in Indiana. He had just been fired from two different Evansville jobs in the months before. What was he doing driving from Terre Haute? It made me think that he probably drove around a lot out of a feeling of uneasiness, boredom, or restlessness. Jeffrey Lynn Hand grew up in Washington, Indiana. It's a nice little town in southwest Indiana. Yearbook photos of him look so typical and all-American. He looks so much like every other kid in those photos. He kind of resembles the actor Jay North from the old Dennis the Menace television show when he's a little kid. In 2019, Parabon Nanolabs solved the long, cold 1972 murder of Indiana State University student Pamela Milam. Her killer, Jeffrey Lynn Hand, was infamous in Indiana in the 1970s for a time, but most people would not recognize his name today. It's a tangled story, but let's start at the point that the public in Indiana first becomes aware of Jeffrey Lynn Hand. In 1973, two newlyweds, Carol and Jeffrey Wayne Thomas, were returning back to their home in Evansville after visiting family in Chicago. Like so many young people in those days, they were hitchhiking. For young people, it seemed an easy and cheap way to get around. The trip to Chicago had gone okay, and now they were headed back home, down to Evansville. They got a ride from a young, blond, white man south of Terre Haute. Jeffrey Lynn Hand said he lived in Gibson County, but he could take them all the way to Evansville, as it was not that much farther. They were very grateful. Carol and Jeffrey Wayne had had some trouble getting rides, as they were an interracial couple. Carol was white, and Jeffrey Wayne Thomas was black. But, and this is 1973. There are a lot of racist people out there, and the world is not much better now, but back in 1973, it was even probably a little tougher. But the Thomases were a kind sort of people. They were friendly, and they thought if they were nice to people, they could change minds and hearts and work toward educating people. The ride south on Highway 41 went fine, but then Jeffrey Lynn Hand turned off toward his farm in Gibson County, saying he needed to get something really quickly before they continued on south to Evansville. The Thomases were not too concerned. It was only a quick detour, and they were thankful for the ride after all. They couldn't complain. As they pulled up to the farmhouse, Jeffrey Lynn Hand pulled a gun and said that he was robbing them. They laughed at first, thinking this was a joke. Hand fired the gun through the roof of his car, and no one was laughing now. He told them he wanted money. The couple had $1.17 on them. They were hitchhiking home because they had literally nothing. This is 1973. They didn't have credit cards. Being newlyweds and young, they had no valuables. They said they might be able to borrow money from family and friends in Evansville if Hand would take them there. Hand didn't want to take them both, so he tied Carol's hands and feet and left her in a grain bin. It's sort of a big round storage building for grain and other things. I don't think that Hand really wanted money at all. Maybe that was part of it. He had just been fired from his job at Cook & Sons. But I think his primary motivation was that he wanted to keep Carol for a while. To do that, he would need to get rid of her husband, Jeffrey Wayne Thomas. Hand did not take Mr. Thomas all the way to Evansville to get the money. Instead, he murdered him just a few miles away by shooting him and stabbing him in the chest. He also cut Mr. Thomas's throat. Hand then turned back toward Carol and the farm. Carol, however, in the meantime, had been struggling to free herself, and she had managed to do so. She ran to the nearest farmhouse and called the police. The police then had to take had Carol take them back to the farm. As they were standing there, looking around, Jeffrey Lynn Hand drove up just at that moment and was taken into custody. He later led police to the body of Mr. Thomas. Mr. Jeffrey Wayne Thomas was only 22 when he died. He and his wife were just starting their lives together. They had plans and dreams that were all taken away in an instant. Mr. Thomas was beloved by his community in Evansville, and people there were in an intense state of grief and shock. They were also outraged. I mean, who wouldn't be? It's just outrageous. Mr. Thomas's brother, though, Willie Thomas, spoke out on behalf of the family, calling for peace in the community and peace between blacks and whites. Justice, however, would not be fully realized. Jeffrey Hand would plead not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury did indeed find him not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was to be held for life in the state hospital. I hate to think that if his victims had been a white man and woman instead of a black man and a white woman, that the jury would have seen things differently. But it's difficult not to think that. I think that if his victim had been a white man, I think Jeffrey Lynn Hand probably would have gotten a guilty verdict and serious jail time. Jeffrey Lynn Hand, however, would not stay in a mental institution for life. Due to an error by state hospital officials, he was released in August of 1976 on a technicality. Even with Carol Thomas bravely testifying against him in court, he was freed. Even with the severe brutality of the murder of Mr. Thomas, he was freed. Even though he had been violent while in custody and severely injured other inmates, Jeffrey Lynn Hand was set free. 1977 would see an explosion of young women being abducted and murdered in Indiana. Jeffrey Hand was not the only perpetrator. We know of several who were in and out of custody at that time. I'm trying to put together a timeline of those known perpetrators and the months that they would have been free to offend. But one thing we do know about Jeffrey Hand is on January 24th, 1978, he attempted to abduct a woman from a Kokomo, Indiana shopping mall. And of course, that's a couple hours away from where he lived. So again, that driving around quite a bit. In that attempted abduction, Hand would die in a shootout with police. One police officer was also wounded. The woman luckily escaped unharmed. Jeffrey Lynn Hand would pose no more danger to the world. But at the top of this article, I mentioned Pamela Milam. In 1972, she was a student at Indiana State University in Terre Haute. On September 15th, she disappeared. Her roommate, friends, and family knew that this was not like her. Her father drove to Terre Haute in an effort to find her. He found her red 1964 Pontiac Tempest in a campus parking lot. He had the spare key, and so he searched the car. And there he sadly found his own daughter's body in the trunk of the car. She had been strangled and her hands were tied behind her back. She had been sexually assaulted. Her mouth was covered in an excessive amount of adhesive tape. Investigators did not believe she had been sexually assaulted at the time. They did seem to believe that the killer may have driven her car around quite a bit after abducting her and published a photo of it in an effort to get tips from potential witnesses. They were hoping someone might have seen him driving. But her case would sadly go cold until 2019. Parabon Nanolabs would collect DNA from Jeffrey Lynn Hand's sons. That was very generous of them to cooperate and donate that DNA. They would make a 99.99% match to the DNA that was found on Pamela Milam's body. The details of how Pamela Milam was tied and strangled immediately made me think of Anne Harmeyer in 1977. And I'm sure other people thought that as well, but there are a lot of other victims out there um, that I suspect Jeffrey Lynn Hand of murdering. One of them is Anne Klein. Her murder happened uh, in the January before Jeffrey Lynn Hand interacted with the Thomas family. It'd be right before, just a few months before their abduction and murder was in June, and in winter, early winter of 1973. Anne Klein was a teacher. She was murdered at the old courthouse. At the time, a business school that she worked for was occupying rooms in the old Vanderburgh County Courthouse, and her classroom was in the basement. She was working in there and talked to a student. That student left, walked up the stairs. He heard a scream, but he didn't come back because he thought it was somebody maybe playing a joke. He then just left, and but that scream that he heard was Anne Klein being murdered. I've written about her case and also made a video on her case. There are a lot of other murders. So Christine Kozik was murdered near Purdue in 1977. Linda Sue Ferry was locked in her own trunk, murdered and locked in her own trunk in 1977, much like Pamela Milam. Julie Ann Seyfried was also murdered. She was shot, but her murder happened south of Indianapolis. I believe he killed Vicki Lynn Harrell in Bloomington in 1972. I think a lot of his murders, I think he tended to troll for victims in college towns. Pamela Milam was murdered in Terre Haute, that's a big college town for Indiana State University. Anne Klein was teaching at a college in the old courthouse. And Vicki Lynn Harrell was murdered, picked up, abducted from Bloomington and murdered in 1972. And Bloomington is, of course, a college town. And Christine Kozik, as I said, at Purdue. I think Jeffrey Lynn Hand tended to hang around colleges because if you're a young person about the same age as the other college kids, you can walk into any building pretty much, sit around in the hallway of a classroom building, stroll all across campus, drive around. When Christine Kozik was abducted and murdered in 1977 in Purdue, people called in tips. And one of the things that they said was, these were young women, and they said they were leaving the bar, they were getting into their car, and some guy tried to open their car door and get in with them and basically carjack them. I don't know if investigators took those tips seriously, but more than one young woman reported that this man had tried to get into their car with them. And I feel like that's probably how a lot of his crimes kind of went down, that he would ambush women on college campuses. But yeah, I think they should definitely consider him in the murder of Christine Kozik, Linda Sue Ferry, and Anne Klein for sure. Those college town murders, and Vicki Lynn Harrell. Those college town murders really bother me. There's no such thing as a part-time serial killer. They think about this all the time. It's what they want to do all the time. And I see that in Jeffrey Lynn Hand, the driving, that obsessive driving all over the state of Indiana. Well, much of the state of Indiana. Back to the scene of the kidnapping of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas. In 1973, this is the summer of 1973, Jeffrey Lynn Hand had 2 cars at that farmhouse. I couldn't, that's bizarre. I can't believe anybody who had just been fired from 2 different jobs in Evansville would have 2 cars. Were they stolen? How did he get 2 cars? He had a Chevy and a Pontiac, and neither of them were very old. They were both fairly new. Jeffrey Lynn Hand had been fired from 2 different Evansville jobs between March and June when he committed the Thomas murder. How was he affording these 2 cars? He had 2 guns on his person and a knife. Some other serial killers that I've studied made a sort of side living by robbing different places, either committing burglary or just simply armed robbery. Go to a town where nobody knows you, commit an armed robbery, come back with a handful of cash. Jeffrey Lynn Hand had a wife and 2 young children. He was not living with them in 1973 when he committed the abduction of the Thomas couple and the murder of Mr. Thomas. So he had time to drive around and do whatever. And with 2 cars, somebody might have seen you in the Chevy and thought you looked a little sketchy. But the next week when you're driving around that same town in the Pontiac, they might not recognize that would be you again. What was the trip back from Terre Haute? What was he doing up there? If he needed money and was out of work, why drive around like that? You're just wasting a lot of money and gas. Did he commit other crimes like in that time on that same day? You know, I wonder if there are any other records of unsolved armed robberies or just plain break-ins, that kind of thing. Because he's picking them up in the evening. It's not daytime when they get a ride from him. Many of the unsolved murders I mentioned took place, as I said, on college campuses. I really think they should, investigators should look at that with Jeffrey Lynn Hand. And it's not unheard of. We know Ted Bundy often found his victims in college towns. Perhaps there was a serial predator hunting victims in Indiana's college towns. I think probably there was, and I think it was Jeffrey Lynn Hand. Hand's known murders are Pamela Milam in September of 1972 and Jeffrey Wayne Thomas in June of 1973. He was in custody for the Thomas murder from June of 1973 until August of 1976 when he was freed on that technicality. Hand was killed in a shootout with police on January 1978 in Kokomo after he attempted the abduction of another young woman. I think a great many Indiana cold cases could be solved with the aid of a DNA sample from Parabon Nanolabs. That is the sample for Jeffrey Lynn Hand. My personal theory is he's responsible for many more abductions and murders than we know about. There's no such thing as a part-time serial killer. Some of the earliest murders that I think he had a hand in are there's a woman who lived in Washington, Indiana, and there's actually 2 women who lived in Washington, Indiana, the same town that Hand grew up in and the same one he came back to after his time in the service. And one of those women is Elizabeth Collison. And Elizabeth Collison worked at the bank. And in 1970, she went missing. So let's talk about that just for a little bit. Okay, so August 1st, 1972, Elizabeth Collison, she's 45, and she's supposed to go to a dinner meeting in Washington, Indiana. The meeting was supposedly with a client for her bank, according to her family. Who was she meeting? Was there someone in town who targeted her because she was connected to the bank? Was there someone having financial difficulties in town? Elizabeth's car was later found parked at the bank. Who would kidnap a 45-year-old lady in a small town like Washington, Indiana? Why would someone target her exactly? Who would want to hurt her? She has never been found. And remember, she worked at the bank. Jeffrey Lynn Hand, as we know, was not having a great track record with keeping jobs in 72, 73. And so maybe if he's having money issues, he might take it out on somebody at the bank. And he did not like women, so he liked to abuse and kill women. So keep that in mind. A year before that, in 1971, a lady named Bernadette Baker, she was 50. She worked at the gas company as a secretary. On April 14th, Bernadette Baker was bludgeoned and strangled with a piece of wire in her own garage. There was evidence of a struggle. Her empty purse was found on the driveway. Her husband, Roy Baker, woke up from nap and realized that his wife was not home yet from the church function she had gone to. And so he went out looking for her, found the car, found her. He called the police immediately and reported the murder. But this is a small town in 1971, and sadly, police managed to extract a confession from him somehow, and he was later convicted of his wife's murder. If you were going to kill your spouse in a small town, wouldn't you come up with a better plan to get away with it? The murder also looks like a robbery. Her purse was emptied out and taken, but it also appears to be the work of a cold-blooded killer. Mrs. Baker was hit on the head with a blunt object and had multiple lacerations to her skull. Wire was twisted around her neck in order to strangle her, maybe to silence her. It could definitely be the husband. Maybe there was an ongoing domestic violence situation that we don't know about. I tend to doubt that, though. When Mr. Baker died in 2000, in the year 2000, he and Bernadette were buried together. I feel like if the family felt that that he was guilty, they would not have buried him next to their mother, who would bury their mother's killer next to their mother. And it is a very sweet little double headstone, like most married couples have in the U.S. So yeah, I feel like if he had actually murdered her, they would have not buried them together. I feel like, this killer is Jeffrey Lynn Hand also. Mrs. Baker worked at the gas company. And as we know, Jeffrey Lynn Hand was having trouble paying his bills, and definitely in 73. And I can't imagine it was much better in 72 and 71. But I feel like, back in those days, in 1971, people paid their bills in person in a small town. Mrs. Bernadette Baker would have been the person that he would see when he would go to pay the bill. And if he's having trouble paying that bill, he might have been, he might have felt that he was being shamed or embarrassed, and he might have been frustrated with her because he wasn't able to pay the bill. And maybe the gas was getting cut off, and she's the one who's calling to remind you to bring such and such amount of money to get it turned back on and things like that. So I could see both of these women as being targets that Jeffrey Lynn Hand could be very aggravated with in 1971 and 72. Yeah, certainly Washington, Indiana was was the home of a serial killer. Technically, he only has 2 murders attributed to him, but he was um, intending to abduct, assault, and murder the woman in Kokomo when he was apprehended or stopped in that shootout with the police and killed in January of 1978. Yeah, so that's Jeffrey Lynn Hand. I would watch for in the future. Um, watch for more murders to be solved using Jeffrey Lynn Hand's DNA. That's him on the left pointing his finger at reporters in his trial in the Thomas murder. And there's a bug shot there. But yeah, I would watch for in the future a few more murders to be solved in which Jeffrey Lynn Hand was the killer. Thanks for listening to Storytimer at Large. I hope you'll consider subscribing, hitting that bell icon. If you like justice, if you like to see killers brought to justice and you like victims to get justice, hit the thumbs up for justice button there, that little icon with the thumbs up. And consider sharing the videos. Some of these cases that I cover, quite a lot of them are unsolved, and sharing the video helps get the word out, and potentially you and I can maybe be a part of solving a case. Thanks for listening.